Okay, we are live.
All right, we're reconvening our morning meeting this morning. We're going to shift gears and talk about H-132, an act relating to the taking of fur bearers with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. For the record, I'm Andrea Shortsleeve. I'm the current commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And with me, I have Major Sean Fowler, our Warden Service, Wildlife Director John Austin, and Wildlife Program Manager Dave Sawsville. So thank you for the invitation to come in here to discuss the bill with the committee. I just have a brief statement to make, and then we will be happy to answer any questions that the committee members have regarding the bill, regarding our position. H-132 only prohibits the taking of fur bearers over bait in non-agricultural settings. The bill does not remove bait piles or carcasses from the landscape. This bill does not ban the use of bait to attract animals to bird feeders or game cameras. Instead, H-132 focuses on eliminating a specific form of hunting. H-132 is trying to address a social values issue. This bill does not address any biological or conservation issues and is not based in science or wildlife management. So for these reasons, Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife does not support H-132. We're not aware of any population issues with fur bearers in the state. We are not aware of any disease transmission stemming from scavenging on carcasses, which occurs naturally on the landscape. And if we were aware of one of these issues associated with population trends or heightened disease transmission, we would absolutely deal with it.
I guess I'll start. That's remarkably short. I guess, how many fur bearers are taken over bait piles every year?
We don't know.
Well, stunning. How you don't have to, no one has to report? So how do you know there's not a problem?
Currently, there's no requirement to report on fur bearers harvested by hunting. We only do that with the trapping seasons. And the other ways that we monitor these populations are we require, sorry, I'm David Sawsville with the Fish and Wildlife staff, yeah. But the other ways we require is the fur buyers have to report what they purchased from the state. And the individuals that are trapping also have to report. So that is where we get an indice off of the fur buyer's license. So we require anybody that buys furs within the state to also have a license.
If I may, mostly true with the exception of bobcats. You are still required, even at hunting, you still have to report bobcats to the department and you have to turn over the carcasses and the pelts have to be tagged by a game warden.
Have you been getting, we passed a wanton waste bill a few years ago now, and I guess I'd like an update on how you're implementing that and if there's been any enforcement activity of it.
I would have to go back and look to know the answer to that question specifically. If I remember correctly, I think there was a specific exemption made for the hunting of coyotes in the wanton waste bill specifically. So other things, I know we have had some cases with that. I couldn't give you a number without doing the research.
And I guess I'm a little, I'm not understanding. We took testimony and saw evidence that you all educate the public and ask them not to feed wildlife for a number of reasons. And I'm not sure how would we reconcile your position on this with your position on other people feeding wildlife and attracting them to their houses for viewing.
Start. It's a fair question. You're right. We prohibit feeding of deer. We prohibit the feeding of bear, prohibit the feeding of turkeys, waterfowl. And we do that for a variety of reasons. With deer, it's largely because of the risk of disease transmission. With black bear, I looked at David Sawsville, but that prohibition has been in effect for decades. So I'm not sure what the thinking was at the time. With waterfowl, it's disease transmission, but it's also a matter of ensuring reasonable harvest of the species and not overly disrupting their migratory behavior. In the case of fur bearers, part of the issue that we've had in thinking about this bill, what you're trying to do is if, as the commissioner said, if you were to prohibit hunting over bait piles, the carcasses still exist on the landscape. And so, while we're not aware of any sort of biological or ecological problem associated with these animals feeding on these carcasses, because these animals are scavengers. They're natural scavengers. They'll feed on a dead animal on the side of the road. They'll feed on a dead animal on somebody's farm. That happens. It's their natural behavior. Black bears emerge from their dens in the spring. There's not a lot of food for them. One of the first things they do is they start scouring the landscape, trying to find a carcass of a dead animal. It's an important source of food for them. So part of the issue with the bill is that you're trying to restrict something that's going to happen on the landscape with or without it. And then you're putting the hunting community in a position where if they're not going to know whether or not they're able to take an animal if it's on or near a carcass.
I guess I would say that in nature, carcasses would be distributed, not piled up in the same place and able to be shot at from someone's house or from their barn, which we did take testimony that happens. I think the comparison is a little, I'm not sure I understand how you could compare the two.
Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is farmers will continue to dispose of carcasses as they do. And butchers will continue to dispose of carcasses as they do. So I agree with you, Madam Chair. The distribution of carcasses that die from natural causes on the landscape, they're widespread. They're not concentrated, but there are concentrations of carcasses as a result of these other activities, but they're human activities, and wildlife take advantage of that.
So is it the position of the department that you actually support people being able to shoot from their homes out at a pile of bait in the daytime or the nighttime?
Can I ask a question?
No, I just need an answer to my.
Well, I'd like to ask a question about that. Are we regulating the method of taking and the place we're taking it from? Or are we after shooting over bait? It seems like we've gone off on a tangent now. Just because if I live on 100 acres and I want to shoot out my back door, what business is it of anybody's? That's why I wanted to interrupt.
I'd like to hear the answer to the question.
I will say, I would agree. I think it's a difficult thing to say because not all homes and not all situations are the same. So would I support that in downtown Montpelier? Absolutely not. But like the representative said, if he lives on 100 acres, I mean, why are we choosing to make that our business of whether he wants to shoot out the window or not? I think over the bait, there's more room for discussion there, but it's nuanced at best, right? And the reason I say that is because I'll use deer because that is the easiest one to explain, even though there's nuance in that. So you cannot feed or hunt deer over bait unless you're actually using a food plot. You can intentionally go out and grow crops, whatever they happen to be, and you can hunt over that. You can feed birds, songbirds, there's no prohibition of that until deer come and start eating the bird seed, unless the bird feeder is 5 feet off the ground. If the bird feeder is 5 feet off the ground and the deer are coming in and cleaning up what's knocked out, now it's not against the law anymore. So there's nuance in all of these things. It's not, that's why I think it's a difficult question to answer because there's never any absolutely no, you can't do that.
Representative Voss.
I think for me, when I read the law, right after it says taking fur bearers, it says with the intention of attracting wildlife. That made it different for me than an animal that dies in the woods and animals are eating it and maybe a hunter comes along and kills it. This is, I feel like, it's intentionally left to attract an animal so that a hunter can shoot it, which, you're right that, it kind of is I'm just wondering, like, my husband was a really big hunter, his father was a really big hunter, they loved hunting, they loved tracking animals and kind of the whole sport of it. And this seems like an unfair, to me, practice, where animals, are misguided, thinking this is, they think it's a wild food thing. And meanwhile, there's someone out there to kill them. So it seems unfair. It's a social, like you said, but it just seems unfair to me. It doesn't seem like in the spirit of hunting the way I know hunting.
Yeah,
I will say, when I listen to a lot of the information questions that people ask, saying that everybody assumes it's 100% success. That is not the case with any of this. They do not shoot animals every day. They do not shoot hundreds of animals, within a week. So I think it's a little difference in that case. Also, each type of fur bear or species of wildlife, they have different animal behaviors. So as we talked about, deer go to bait and they congregate in herds. Birds flock together, so there's more possibility of transmission. Predators are usually single, maybe during the breeding season, there's two of them, or a family unit of coyotes or fox. So that's generally what they're exposed to. They intermingle and, go over each other's territory a little bit, but they defend those territories. So there isn't the same congregation as you would with waterfowl or deer or turkeys. So it's a completely different animal behavior.
Before we go too much further, Madam Chair, you ask an important question, so I want to just offer another thought. I think it's safe to say what the department supports when it comes to hunting is safe, ethical hunting. The issue of ethics is a tricky one. And to the major's point, there are people who shoot deer off the back deck. Is that ethical? Somebody shot a coyote or a fox off their back deck. Is that different from shooting a deer or a bear? These issues of ethics are challenging. We try to deal with the issue of safety and what normal people would, average people would consider reasonable behavior on the part of the hunting community through our hunter education program. It's not foolproof. People make mistakes and exercise poor judgment. But by and large, we're not finding that these sorts of things create a problem. And when we're thinking about the activity of intentionally putting something out to attract an animal in order to hunt it, as the major says, that happens in other instances. You can grow sugar beets to attract deer, and you're growing them specifically so that you can have a better opportunity of harvesting a deer. You can put decoys out to attract turkeys or waterfowl, specifically to draw them closer to you so you have a better chance at successfully harvesting one of those animals. So it's a tough line to try and figure out when does attracting an animal for purposes of hunting cross that threshold from ethical to unethical.
What does the North American model for wildlife management say about the baiting of fur bearers to hunt them?
Not sure it's addressed in there, honestly. And the reason I really don't think it's addressed in there is because there's no universal laws for hunting over bait, meaning in many, many other states, you can hunt all kinds of predators, you can hunt deer over bait. Is perfectly acceptable in, specifically like the state of Ohio. I know well, because I have friends that hunt down there. They load the back of their truck full of corn to go down and hunt deer in the state of Ohio because the residents of the state of Ohio think that that's perfectly acceptable. That meets their ethical threshold. So that's why I don't think it was actually specifically addressed in the North American model. But I will defer to the two of
I
you.
think also in the North American model, you have to realize that it's a history of what's happened over the last 100 years. It is not a management philosophy. It's just kind of been tracking how we progressed over the last century. And I don't think we don't use the American model as a management policy.
I thought it addressed fair chase.
I think it does. I can't remember.
So you all aren't really
How.
here with it.
It's one of the 7 tenants.
Yeah, that's what I said.
And I'm just gonna ask a couple more, and I know you have others who ask questions, but I guess I felt like, Mr. Sosville, how many bait piles are out there? You're saying we don't, that it's not 100% perfect, or that they don't do these things, but who are they and how do you track them? The bait
I
piles.
believe I said that. I said we track the numbers harvested through the fur bearers license. They do a report on that. So I did not mention that we don't track the hunters themselves.
No, in a subsequent comment, before it was diverted a little bit, you said that they don't have 100% take rate over the pot. And who is they and how many are there that you're tracking that you could say this?
I cannot tell you how many total hunters are out there using this. I can tell you this from the people that I have spoken with when they hunt over them. They don't shoot coyotes every day. That was my point. That is not a guarantee that you will take an animal when you're hunting over bait.
Representative Tagliavia.
A couple of questions, to address the number of bait piles and the number of coyotes that are shot. Over the past decade, have you noticed any drastic decline in coyote population, given the rules that we have now and allowance of hunting over bait?
No, and do you want to expand? Yeah.
It's probably the most stable fur bearing population out there. If you look at the tracking that they've done through trapping, if hunting was affecting the population, where they would not be staying steady within the trap population. So we have seen no decline with any of the indices that we have at this point.
Okay, just a couple more things. I believe just north of us, across the border in Canada, it is legal to hunt bears over bait. Is that correct?
Think so. I mean, I can tell you with certainty that New Hampshire and Maine allow the hunting of bears over bait. Quebec, I'm not 100% sure of. I think so, but I'm not sure.
And just a point of fact, I lived on the Eastern Shore of Maryland for almost 20 years, moving from New York. And I found it foreign to know that it was legal to hunt deer over bait. One of the reasons was because of the huge population, to manage the population. So I just wanted to put it out there. I know that to manage the spread of CWD, that there were, in some states have that, but some states still do allow hunting deer over bait. Thank you.
Representative Labor, then North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have hunted coyote with bait. And I'll describe the bait. The bait was a dead calf. Didn't survive birth. A neighbor said, "Would you like that?" Yeah. So I took and I wrapped a chain around the legs so that coyotes couldn't drag it away. And I drove the stake into the ground a substantial distance. 2 days later, I watched quite frequently, and I saw a coyote come out. Wow, isn't that interesting? Only 150 yards. That coyote made 2 circles around the bait, bugged out before I could even chamber around. Why did he do that? So I checked that out. The mother of that calf had been treated with antibiotics. The nose on that particular animal is so sensitive to non-normal smells, it bugged out. I left it there for 10 days, so I couldn't stand the smell, and buried it. We're not talking about a defenseless animal. This animal is brilliant. So that was 0% kill. And I would suggest that there's a lot of that. This spring, I can guarantee you in the Northeast Kingdom, you're gonna see falling turkeys out of their roosts. They're starving, they're dying, they're falling. There's food. Who's coming in to get it? The coyotes, the turkey buzzards, and the ravens will pick up the small parts. That's natural food chain. The same for our deer. They're yarded up tight right now. We don't feed deer in the winter. There's no food plots. I have planted turnips. They loved it. Did I harvest anything over it? No. But they liked me for it. Fur-bearing animals. I guess I'm going to ask a pointed question to the people who have more boots on the ground than I do at my age. What species have you seen a decent decline in fur bearers? I would suggest it's probably moose. Well, there's predators to the moose, and they're called ticks. And the fur bearer that's carrying that tick is probably called a deer. Or peripheral to a field. Or the brushes. Not in the deep woods. My own experience. I cannot support this bill.
Other members have questions? Did you? Representative North.
Yes, I did. Just want to ask that, Fish and Wildlife, what effect do coyotes have on other apex or near apex predators in terms of population? Why are we seeing fewer of other apex or near apex predators than we would if coyote population were less? Just wondering.
Well, their behavior, yeah, I mean, first of all, they're highly adaptable. And they're very successful at being on the landscape. They are successful at maintaining their populations. When mortality factors affect them, they actually respond very aggressively to restore their population. They're territorial. You know, they occupy a family pack will occupy an area of 4 to 5 square miles at least. So there's only so much space on the landscape for coyotes to exist. And they compete with fox and gray fox and bobcat and wolves. Wolves and coyotes don't mix very well. So the dynamic between coyotes and other predators is complicated. It happens. You know, coyotes will kill and eat foxes from time to time. There's, you know, they try to maintain their home range and their territory to the exclusion of other predators.
Representative Bartholomew Pritchard and then Sadko.
There was a mention that when pelts are sold, that those are reported. I think, did I have that right? I'm just wondering what the market is for coyote pelts. Are they typically sold? Sought after?
They are for different purposes and it changes with the markets and international activities. Coyotes historically can ban on this, you know, a lot of the trim on jackets, they hats and things like that, but they are sought after and it depends on where you are, just as anything, how they're graded by quality, color, and size and things like that. So they are sold, utilized.
So do you think that most of these animals that are shot are the pelts are sold or no? Any idea?
That I can't guarantee. I know if you're a trapper or somebody's out predator hunting, they generally skin the animal and sell it.
Senator Pritchard.
Would it be fair to say the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Department is to manage all wildlife for the people of Vermont? I think that's pretty much what your mission is, right? Okay, so we've had we've had the coyote hunting over bait and, you know, trapping and stuff has existed for years. Has that had a detrimental effect on a stable coyote population?
No,
It has not, which is why the commissioners expressed the position that she has.
Okay. How important to helping you manage the population of this particular species or any species? But let's talk about coyotes because that's what this discussion has been about. How important to managing this animal is it to know how many bait piles are out in the woods? How does that help you effectively manage this animal? Tell me that.
Know that having that level of information would inform our decisions about management any more than the information that we already have. I think if there was a problem with the population or any kind of a drastic change one way or the other, the data that we collect on an annual basis would illustrate that. And if we were to observe that, we would want to deal with it accordingly. But as Mr. Sawsville noted, it's from our data, it is the fur bearer population that has the longest trend of population stability. And you know, you can estimate the number of coyotes in the state based on what we know about their behavior, their ecology, and the territory and home range size that they need to occupy. What we know about the landscape in order to support them, and any number of research projects from around the area have looked at how do you estimate population size of coyotes. Well, the population estimates that I have read for this region would suggest we maintain a population somewhere between 6,000 to 9,000 coyotes. Having additional information, I mean, look, when Dr. Renfrew was in here speaking with all of you about the Wildlife Action Plan, I think one of the points that she made, this is a point that we come back to as a department time and time again, is there are a lot of pressing conservation challenges facing our wildlife today. And, you know, we're working hard to prioritize which challenge is going to get the attention and the resources necessary in order to address it. Our fur bearer populations, fortunately, hopefully it stays that way, are doing pretty well. So we're putting our resources towards things like understanding what's happening with the moose population decline and how we can look to the future to ensure that moose remain healthy on the Vermont landscape, or our grassland birds, or rare plants and rare natural communities, and the issue associated with fragmentation. The list goes on and on. So
what impact would that have on those things that you do if you had to take, without additional resources, you had to focus those people on counting bait piles in the state?
you're robbing Peter to pay Paul with everything that we do. Use an old metaphor. So it's taking limited resources that we have and applying them to collecting information that arguably doesn't really inform decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you brought up the ethics around all this, and I think that's really important. And my understanding is that, well, especially when we're talking about the hunting of coyotes, is that they are largely hunted, not for their pelts, especially outside of trapping season, but they're really hunted because people have hunted them for a long time because they're considered competitors for deer. And so if there's fewer coyotes, there's more deer. And we've heard this a lot, it's repeated a lot. And we know that it's not true. It's not true in Vermont. I don't know if it's true in other places. We know it's not true in Vermont. But people do it anyway. And given the fact that that activity doesn't have the kind of economic value that people think it has, it strikes me as wrong. The wildlife of the state is owned by us all, and we should be treating it well. If we're going to kill an animal, which we do all the time, We ought to be doing it for justifiable reasons. We've heard a bunch of reasons why people might want to kill coyotes that are not about keeping the deer population healthy. And honestly, I think that people don't put those arguments in good faith. This is really about giving people the opportunity to continue to hunt coyotes because they don't like them, because that's what they learned when they were kids, or that's what they think is true despite the evidence that we have in abundance. And so I think it ought to be the mission of our Fish and Wildlife Department to make sure that our animals of all kinds are treated respectfully and that we don't take them without good reason. And that was really the rationale behind this bill, that we, are taking animals for really good reasons, for food, for use of their parts in some other way, which people derive real benefit from. I haven't really heard an argument that we're taking these fur bearers in a way that seems justifiable. And I know this is an activity which a lot of people have been doing for a long time, but in light of new evidence, we should be willing to change our practice. And so that brings me to a couple of questions. One is, I was wondering if you have a response, but also I'm wondering, this makes me wonder, are there other creatures? Oh, and I did want to make actually one other point, which is that, yes, coyote populations are stable. These other fur bearer populations are largely stable. There's more to species health. There's more to ecosystem health than simply the numbers of creatures on the environment, right? There's all sorts of other population dynamics. There's population genetics that are at work. There's lots of factors that we don't even begin to know, the science around. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. The ecology of our forests and fields are immensely complicated, and we very rarely know with great precision, really, the effects that we're having. So to just say that we can continue to do this because the populations are stable, I think, okay, great. But I think there's a much bigger picture that we're ignoring simply because we don't know. And when we don't know, we shouldn't act. And so we shouldn't be killing animals thinking that it's going to be okay when we don't really know that. And then I'll leave it there and then I'll follow up with another question. That's a thought.
It's a really complicated thought. I don't know. You have a response because trying to formulate a good one. Consider all of your points, and I think by that line of reasoning, we shouldn't be doing anything we do on the landscape.
I think that's what I said.
Well,
We need a reason.
reason.
We need a reason. We need a pretty good reason before we make big changes to our landscape. And I think killing predators is a significant impact on our landscape.
Appreciate your point, Representative Sackless. And may I help?
Not yet.
I'm trying to figure out how best to respond. My personal views and my professional views. I agree with you. First of all, I would offer this. The department considers coyotes and other predators to be important, essential, wonderful parts of the Vermont landscape and our ecosystem. And we want them to be healthy and thriving on the landscape and performing the functions that they do. The issue of coyotes and hunting coyotes and coyote predation on deer I mean, that's been a topic of discussion as long as I've been around and a lot longer. But the reality is, because this has been studied to death in Canada and in around the United States, yes, they eat deer, and no, they're not a cause of suppressing deer populations, at least not around here. I think that it's important for the hunting community, when they're killing an animal, to do it for a legitimate reason. And I think by and large, hunters do. Most of our hunters are ethical, law-abiding citizens. They care deeply about the resource that they're pursuing and how and why they pursue it. For most of them, it's a very important part of their life. It's as spiritual as it is, just an enjoyable way to connect with nature for them. As a hunter myself, that's certainly how I feel. I guess I'm just sort of.
And I totally appreciate that. And I don't think that's really what I'm getting at. I mean, most hunters, you're right, most hunters take animals for good reasons, mostly to feed their families. And I think that is an entirely legitimate, justifiable reason to do that. It's not really what we're talking about in this particular case.
Not sure, Representative, how restricting hunting of fur bearers over bait piles gets at your concern, though. People can still hunt them. And even if you put the whole bait pile issue aside, people can still hunt them. Other than coyotes, there are seasons on fur bearers and when people can hunt fur bearers.
But that actually is a whole other conversation about whether that's also a good idea.
That would be a very different conversation than the one around bait piles. Fur bearers.
Great statement. I think one thing they have to realize is that this is human dimensions issue that you're speaking about right here. It's not a biological issue. We have 18 species of fur bearers throughout the state. And the Vermont public's opinion of all of those species runs the gamut from people, as you said, who hate them for unknown reasons, to people who don't want to touch them. And I think we try to manage for all of those aspects. And I think that is the mission of the department, is that, as they said, we're managing for multiple use, we're managing to maintain the species into the future. And if we felt that there's an issue with the coyote population, we'd be the first ones here to say we would like to, close the season. And we don't feel that's way.
Representative Tagliavia, then Austin.
Couple questions, with respect to coyote pelts and other pelts of fur bearers. Would you say in the past decade that the market has dropped, the price per pelt has dropped?
Yes.
Would you say that because over the decades it has become socially unacceptable, that could be one of the reasons why the cost or the auction value of pelts has declined?
There are many reasons. Ukrainian war is one of them, and our competition with China is another one. It seems to ebb and flow. I was reading the New York Times last weekend, and the wearing of fur has come back in some areas. So it's not, there's many factors that influence it.
So
The desire is at that time for fashion sometimes personal opinions.
okay, so it's possible with the rise in the use of fur that the market for coyote pelts could increase. I think I heard you say. So there would be then the drive for a hunter to take a coyote when the pelt is best, not just whenever. So the market would be driven by a number of reasons. One being whether it's socially acceptable.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, just, do you have any concerns about, coyotes spreading avian flu? Or species, because that's one of the, arguments that because they're together, different species are together, that flu could spread.
Causing kind of like a cross
Mhm.
species transmission. I don't know, David, you're,
Speak to that.
yes, please, you're the expert on that.
And I just have one more question after that.
Avian flu is statewide already. We're monitoring it with the federal government. Every year we do samples on waterfowl and about 10% of our birds come back with highly pathogenic portion of it. And it is also in a variety of our other bird species, and they've even found it in mammals.
Right.
The only one we've confirmed in our state in the mammal has been a bobcat, which is not something that we expect to see in a lot of bait piles or going into farmyards to affect chickens and dairy cattle. But the main reason we're monitoring is just sampling to see if it has mutated and if there's any danger to the human population. So we don't see fur bearers as a large issue in spreading it. It comes from our wild birds and also moving materials from one farm to another. It's a big case of where they spread it to each other.
Just have two more questions. Can people use poison in a bait pile if they want to get, no, they can't. That's against the law. It's against the regulations. And then I'm just wondering with new technology evolving, will there come a point where you will say you can't hunt this way? You can't hunt with a weaponized drone or a heat-seeking drone. You know what I mean? Will there come a point, I don't know where that line will be drawn for you, but are you thinking about that in terms of the emerging technologies? And because I think this is pretty primitive, probably the bait pile, but it just seems that people will be trying to figure out, how to kill animals in a more efficient way where they may not have to go into the woods, or whatever.
I mean, to specifically address that one, that's already illegal.
Okay.
Yes.
Can someone, I'm sure one of you can help me, why, I know we talk a lot about, we don't allow the sale of most wildlife that's taken in hunting. Why do we allow the sale of fur pelts? What's the history of that? And why is that allowed when other sale of, the wildlife that belongs to all of us? Why are we allowing that?
I mean, historically, a lot of the laws that we have enacted have been to restrict because of overharvest in the past, because of market hunting and feathers and things like that. So the laws have been created to protect the animals from a problem that existed. The sale, if you look at a deer, I'm going to use, if I harvest a deer, I can take the meat home to family, share it with friends. I can still sell that hide. It's a utilization. It's a way of utilizing the animal and using a natural product that isn't synthetic. A lot of our furs, I know people don't like to hear this, but it is renewable. The best I'm wearing right now is made of petroleum products.
We hope it's recycled water bottles.
Exactly.
It doesn't have too much PFAS in it.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
So it's something that can be used and it's something that's biodegradable and originally it's something that's been used historically as a clothing product.
Can I add to that? I want to go back to my point of the nuance in it, in that it's not universally true because, David made the point that he can sell his deer hide. But if the season's open or for 20 days thereafter, I can buy deer meat from David. That's perfectly legal in the state of.
Isn't that a new change then?
No, actually, that's been on the books for much longer than I've been a game warden. That's decades old, that particular one. We still allow, although it's in front of the Fish and Wildlife Board to end the practice, you can still catch wild fish and sell, depending on the species, not universally true, but you can sell fish. And that's across kind of all of North America. So I think that's the difficult thing, but it is a legitimate question about, why do we still allow the selling of fur bearers?
And then, we took some pretty emotional testimony from people who've lost their dogs, and I think it was 3 in 1 year in the state of Vermont, being mistakenly shot over bait piles, and I would like to hear your comments on that.
Since none of you are stepping up.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty in there, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm fairly confident that all 3 of those particular ones happened at night. And it is illegal to use a light to hunt coyotes at night, even though you can hunt them at night. But people have turned to other technologies that fall outside of the prohibition of using a light. And in many instances, it's like a thermal scope. So it goes off a heat signature. And I'm not going to say that it would be impossible for someone to tell the difference between a dog and a wild canine through a thermal scope, depending on what type of domestic canine it was, because you're not going to confuse a Great Dane for a Eastern Coyote. So I think that is one of the issues. Is I think in the particular ones that you're speaking of, I think those happened at night, if I remember correctly.
I mean, I guess as a person who has a dog and knowing that dogs are going to be attracted to bait piles, I'm a little almost that's something that the department thinks is fine, is what I'm hearing you say, that bait piles are okay.
No, I think it's safe to say that that's concerning to us. And it's a tragedy when something like that happens. Without a doubt. Nobody wants to have their dog shot accidentally.
But shooting over bait piles at night is something that you're endorsing.
That could happen not over a big pile, coyote hunting at night, with the technology that Major just mentioned.
Representative Tagley, yeah.
I'm not sure what the situation was with dogs shot at night, whether there was a night vision or infrared scope used or not. As a dog owner myself, had dog in my life since I'm 5 years old. If looking through an infrared scope or a night vision scope, I would be able to tell the difference between my Labrador and a coyote. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Representative Bartholomew, then Pritchard.
There was mention about with the fur-bearing animals, that disease transmission shouldn't be a problem. I'm just recalling one witness we had that actually provided some scientific papers, and I have to admit, I haven't had a chance to read them to figure out whether they make sense, but they referred to things like transmission of tuberculosis and prions and increased parasite intensity. We already talked about avian flu. Can you get back? I don't know. I can give you this witness's name, and you can. I'm just wondering where the flaw is and what that testimony was, because it's contradictory to what you said.
Sure, and I think some of it has to do with the type of disease that is being specifically talked about, the animals that transmit that disease, how those animals feed, and their behavior surrounding food and disease transmission. And I know that you can speak to it a little bit clearer, but I think it's nuanced. You know, it's not all diseases aren't transmitted the same way.
I looked through a number of papers and fur-bearer biologists also do that. And mainly what we found is studies have been on ungulates, deer, and that's where you're looking at the tuberculosis and things like that. A little bit on bear and turkeys, but primarily it's looking at wild elk, because we did feeding programs out west, and they found that those weren't ready to timely bring them together and spreading disease. I found minor, I said possibly parasitic transmission between bears, but it was not affecting the populations at all, because bears are not in large numbers in most cases. And then they had not looked at predators for the most part, the predator species, so it hasn't done a lot there. As I said earlier, most predators are feeding individually, they're not congregated, and that's the issue with a lot of the disease transmission. It's a flock, it's a herd. It's not ones and twos that are coming in. And then with a predator, they're gonna kill the animal or scavenge the animal. They're gonna feed it what they need. They're gonna take it off and cache it somewhere, trying to hide it from their competition.
And I think there also where an animal defecates has a lot to do with disease transmission. So you see ungulates, they'll defecate in the same spot that they're eating. Yeah, and that's not the same for these fur-bearing species.
So would you say your literature review is casual, extensive, or somewhat?
Mine was, we could do a larger one. We could have the library, digital, it's easier to do that, but I have a document that was done even in 2006 where the Wildlife Society looked at vast numbers of studies.
Representative Pritchard,
So one of my concerns with this bill relates to the Fish and Wildlife's department and their ability to manage wildlife. And while this particular bill doesn't stop that, what my concern is, and it's my concern with this bill, over the course of the last 2 years, we have seen bills that effectively, if they were put into place, coyote hunting would not be existent today. We had the dog ban for coyotes. We've had
Representative
the
Pritchard, can you
trapping.
get to the question? Because we need to.
I am getting to the question. I think this is going to, I am worried about the rabbit hole we're going down. And I'm worried, that at some point, based on this bill that we're legislating really has to do with how we feel about something. It doesn't have to do with how we manage the wildlife, how we take care of it. And I have a concern for that. I also have a concern from the constitutional end of this, because what this bill is doing in the Constitution, we're guaranteed the right to hunt fish during seasonable times. This is now saying, well, we have the right to hunt, but we don't have the right to hunt this way.
Richard, is there a question? 3 people need to ask a question and we have to wrap up by noon.
I apologize, Chairman. I guess it was a statement.
Yeah, Representative, now I've lost track. I know Austin and Logan. And
So just to get back to your point about the animal killing something and then taking it off singly. My assumption is, and again, I don't hunt, so I certainly don't have the expertise that you do, but with the bait pile, my sense is that animals would congregate around that and fight, there'd be fight or whatever. That's why I'm wondering if it's if that bait pile can transmit diseases between animals, not like just animals out. And I'm wondering, I don't know, but.
Well, it's a good question. And first of all, I just want to be clear, the department's not looking to diminish the issue of disease transmission in wildland. So that's a very serious issue and we're doing surveillance on it all the time. We have a wildlife vet that serves the Northeast region. We work with her on a regular basis. We are taking tissue samples and other samples from animals all the time because it's an important issue. In terms of the disease, higher risk of disease transmission associated with these sorts of predators around carcasses. As David was indicating earlier, in part, the risk is lower because of their natural behavior. They're not, unlike deer, they're not herd oriented. They don't want to be around large groups of one another, or you don't have red fox who are willing to share a food resource with a bobcat because they don't want to be around each other. That's their natural inclination. And so they take advantage of food and their behavior is such that they do it to the exclusion of other animals, both from their same species as well as from other competitive species. So it's in part the nature of their behavior that reduces that risk.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that this bill is not eliminating bait or carcasses on the landscape, right? So
Right.
those sources would still be there.
Right.
It just wouldn't have someone shooting over.
Right, it wouldn't be the intention,
Correct.
intention.
Yeah.
Logan.
Thank you, Chair. Just really briefly, it does seem like we do have a problem, regardless of where we fall on this, that we need to solve, and the fact that, house families, dogs are being killed, and it sounds like at night, over bait piles. And I don't feel like we've gotten an adequate response to that or suggestions for how to address that issue.
I think that's a really difficult issue, and I can say all four of us sitting here are dog owners, and it is tragic when something like that happens. It would be devastating. I think the issue is very nuanced in putting the onus on solely on people who have bait piles and no responsibility on dogs on the landscape. And I think that's something that should be a piece of the discussion and probably isn't right now.
Say that again. You think it's the dog owner's responsibility?
I think there are multiple parties that are responsible in this issue.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the ethics for a second, because you made it pretty clear that you don't feel like it's the department's role to make these kind of ethical decisions, but I think you are making a lot of ethical decisions when you manage wildlife, whether directly or indirectly. So sort of saying that that's not your realm, I think is really just not true. And in particular example, which comes to mind, is the wanton waste bill we passed with the department's support a couple of years ago. And in my mind, that was very much an ethics bill, right? We weren't regulating populations. We weren't regulating the health of species on the landscape. It was really all about, if you kill an animal, you have to do something with it, and put some pretty strict guidelines around a lot of that. And so what we're saying here is that we're going to weigh in on the ethics. We're going to support the ethics in this case, but we're not going to in this other case. And I don't see the difference.
I agree with you, Representative, on the wanton waste bill. That was something that the department had an interest in for a long time. So glad that it went through. In this instance, this is a bit of a different issue. It's a tricky issue. I mean, you're talking about should we eliminate a hunter's ability to use motion winged decoys for waterfowl hunting because we think that gives an unfair advantage to the waterfowl hunter. Those conversations have come up in our world, but it becomes a.
I'm just pointing out that the department takes ethical stances all the time. And that to say that you are not going to weigh in on this as an ethical issue, I think is an invasion of your responsibility. That and again, with the wanton waste bill, it was really about ethics. It was like, we've decided that this kind of behavior amongst hunters is not okay. Not because it had bad impacts on the population, not because it was causing a health problem. There was no other issues at stake. It was just distasteful to the hunting community and the population at large. And right now, this issue apparently isn't quite as distasteful to enough of the hunting community. It is distasteful to quite a bit of the hunting community. We've heard this. It's not universally distasteful, so it's encountering some pushback, but it's distasteful to the public at large. And it doesn't seem like it would be inappropriate for the department to say, yeah, we see what the public is feeling on this, and we're not going to oppose this bill.
Senator Tagliavia.
Just a quick point. Representative Sakowitz point. if you were yesterday evening out there and you asked if it was unethical, you would have not gotten the result you were after. It's all about who you're polling.
With that, we need to break for lunch. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.